and we're good. So let's see. Doesn't look like it's airdropping. Come on, airdrop. There it is. And that's the one. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and work with Xander's image today. That's the one that I got from his photo. Now, one thing that's really important about this process is nothing is gonna get any better than the photo that you take, right? So if it's too high, it's not gonna like magically become a better perspective. In fact, you want to maintain your rules, such as a horizon line that's somewhere in the middle of your architecture. Obviously, I'm talking about an exterior view. For the interior view, you'd either have to model something really quick and get inside of it. That way you can get your baselines. And for something like, for some of you guys who have maybe curvature, you don't necessarily have to model your whole project, right, to get some lines. But at least for today, I want to show you a couple things where you can take a base image like this. To be fair, you could take this into Photoshop and start changing stuff. It's already got a shade and shadow quality to it. I could give it a transparency layer and really make a hybrid situation. I could print it out, draw on top of it, make it a really nice hybrid drawing, right? Don't get me wrong, all those layers kind of add up in time, but it sounds like you got a week, right? So it sounds like you really need to get an idea across. It sounds like you need to put people in those perspectives and really put somebody in a situation where they're feeling or not feeling the certain emotions that you guys are designing for. Am I right? Or am I right? Anyway. So we got our base image, but keep in mind, those same rules apply. You know, the lightness and darkness. Don't worry so much about the background. We don't have to trace the background. Obviously, I'm not going to trace the window in the back. That would ruin the illusion, right? But we got to start with something, and usually it starts with a good picture. What I like to do is actually take my camera and get it extremely close to the desk. Often I'll even take it upside down, or even actually really far back away and zoom into the shot. Right, is a really good way to get rid of some of the stuff involved. Right, you definitely want to get it low and almost seem like you're at the ground of this model. But that's okay. We don't even have to take this, but what's nice is we get the curbs, we get the sidewalk involved, we get all that stuff and information. Of course, I'm gonna kind of make it up for today because, you know, I don't know Xander's model as much as he does, so we'll work with it. So first thing we wanna do is go into Rhino. In my case, I'm gonna start a new file and put it in inches. So I'm gonna go to units and make sure that it is out of its default and goes to inches, right? In my case, I'm doing a drawing. Right, so I don't really need to make stuff one-to-one. I guess I could, and I probably should follow my own rules. I don't want to necessarily model anything today, but I do want to kind of show you guys we can get an interior situation pretty quick, right? At least a baseline. That way you can either change it in Photoshop or even change it analog, like print it out and, you know, I used to do that all the time. People would be like, how are you so good at sketching? I'd be like, dude, I just modeled it real quick and totally like cheated, you know? And you can totally cheat. Your clients are gonna know, like, who cares? You don't have to tell them, right? What's that one thing? It always goes viral. They're like, they ain't gonna know. They're not gonna know, they're not gonna know. Oh, they're gonna know, right? Anyway, they never know. But, so we're in the right units, and at least for today, we're gonna stick to the top viewport. I'm just going to type in picture and add that picture, enter, and I believe it's on my downloads image. Hopefully it's not my wife like last time. Sweet. It's definitely the image. So first things first, like I want to get my crop box, right? I'm figuring I'm going to put my perspectives on at least 11 by 17. You probably should too, or at least a letter size piece of paper, and tons of them. Right? Very often when you have perspectives, they're very key moments. We talked about this a little bit in Lewis, you know, kind of deciding on your site plan, the approach, you know, what does that look like? What is it supposed to feel like? The entry and sort of that journey that you talk about. Keep in mind, you know, especially like if, for those of you that were in my D2, I'd have you write a poem, right, about a space, right? It's a really good thing to put in a perspective to kind of slow somebody down and put them in that moment, right? Obviously, I'm just trying to give some tips and tricks to be a little bit more sensitive about the communicating this stuff, right? A lot of times a poem with a really good perspective can go a very long way. Suddenly the rest of the project is now making sense to the juror, right? And your studio professor, right? Because there might have been a lot of confusion. So 11 by 17, see how big that is? Pretty dang small, and that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and keep the ratio. Don't really have to worry about scale. I can always scale this down, and to be honest, a perspective can't really be in scale. It's stereoscopic. Anyway, let's get a little bit more screen here. We don't need to see the time the whole time. And what's nice about a picture is I can further crop it with Rhino. So again, I can use my gumball tool, but be careful, you'll definitely want to hold shift and get it somewhere decent. In my case, I'm going to go about right there and kind of add a little bit more space on the other side. It gets rid of this tree a little bit, but that's okay. So I'm going to take this piece, trim, enter, and get rid of the extra that I don't need. Secondly, I can make this a little easier to draw on top of it so I can see it. So I'm going to click on it and hit my properties, and my material properties right here, material. And we're going to go down to object transparency, and I put it at a lot. Next thing I like to do is lock it, L-O-C-K. Locks it. If you do need to unlock something, just type in unlock, enter. Right? Next thing I want to do is maybe establish some layers. So I'm going to go to my layer tab. I already have some by default, but you know, I might want like a large line weight. Some of this stuff, honestly, I just kind of draw all in one color, and then I sort of organize it, right? But very often you want a tree layer, sidewalk layer, topography layer, building layer, wall layer, anything that's going to help you organize this thing, right? And of course, that's going to make Illustrator go a lot faster too. And to be fair, we could actually change the lines in Illustrator, and then we could just drag it onto Photoshop and literally do the same things. So instead of analog base lines, we now have straight, wonderful Illustrator lines to fill in, right? So you could take it that route as well. Anyway, obviously this is more of a studio tutorial, right? Not so much our assignment, but we'll start talking about all these things. Anyway, let's trace this guy, at least enough to get something going. I'm going to double click. One of my favorite tools is of course just a polyline tool if I'm using sort of straight lines. So in my case, I want to establish some things such as where the building is, right? And literally just trace it. What's nice about tracing it here is I can fix a lot of things. So if that was supposed to be straight, shoot, make it straight, right? Might as well fix it while it's here. Now, of course, he knows his architecture a little bit better than I know his architecture. So I'm gonna kind of just stick to the boundaries. Oh, there we go. Get out of here. There we go. So we got some pieces, let's keep going. I can hit spacebar and keep going. I can hold shift to make sure it's straight and really get the rest of the information in there. Clearly, I don't know his building as well. So, fake it till you make it. Fair enough. Enter. You can also do separate lines or curvilinear lines. So maybe this is my topography layer eventually. Get some topography lines in there. I can go outside the page. Sometimes it's even kind of nice. Maybe use a curvilinear line for that one. Fake it till I make it. And do a couple of those. Obviously we'll have one in shadow. Just hitting spacebar every time I finish. To be fair, we probably don't need every single little piece here. I probably could just put it as lines. But let's make it nice, right? Go right up to the building. And what's nice about this process is you can be really accurate. So we can trim stuff. Let's keep going. Some more lines in there. Just kind of start that one up. Looks like we got some more building there. So maybe like a foundation. I'll go with the straight line for that. Maybe line up with other pieces. That might be nice. And fake it till you make it, right? I like to have a little bit of errors in there because it makes it a little bit more real. And it's starting to get there. Let's get some more information in there. So again, just faking it till I make it. I'm holding shift so I can get some nice straight lines in my drawing. After all, this is kind of might even be our final drawing. Probably should have held shift there, but that's okay. It's a tutorial. And again, I could be absolutely butchering your design. I apologize. How dare you trash my name? But this saves us a lot of time from actually modeling this entire thing. Don't get me wrong, if you're a modeler already, you've already taken computer graphics, by all means, you might as well model it, get a perfect perspective, and make 2D, right? Yes, Leo. Yes and no. So as long as I close the shape, image, live paint, and image trace will work really well, right? The way that I'm drawing it right now, since I'm kind of just making it up as I go, I'm not doing a lot of closed things, right? So if that is the route you want to go, make sure you close them, then you're good. You know what I mean by that? Okay. So like in my case, what I mean by closing, right? I'd want to make sure everything is touching, right? You'd want to hatch everything, would be another good solution. But in my case, I'm just kind of tracing it so that you guys can kind of understand the concept. Not really like, oh wow, Veret's so good at this. In fact, I try to make a lot of mistakes. That way you run into the same things, right? Or know how to solve the things that you run into. But I'm gonna fix if you're at this stage, you might as well fix it, or even further design, like, oh, it'd be kind of cool if the window did do that. Oh, okay. So it's not like it's gonna stop the design, right? And I don't know, maybe I'd change it even more. It's looking pretty sweet. Obviously I need a little bit more. I'm trying to get that angle right. But yeah, it's looking pretty good. And it changes the project a little bit. I don't know, even at this point I could still be like, we need windows. Let's do it. Fake it till you make it. Obviously, I'd want to dial in the perspective aspect to it. I'd want to nail that just right. And then add a line. Oh, not there. This is where, the near is probably acceptable. If you guys have ever taken me before, I do not let you use near very often. And then I can hatch stuff still. So obviously I'm just going over a bunch of commands that we can use. So the hatching is equivalent to like a poche, right? I can also trim the hatching. And you can trim it right off. So that's maybe kind of like the darkness of the window. I mean, why would I do that over and over again when I can just copy it? Boom. Not too bad. So what I'm trying to say is this doesn't have to be an extremely long process like it is right now for me. Just sort of slowly clicking. I know how boring that can really be. But let me get the rest of it so that, it's at least a decent picture when the tutorial is said and done. Let's get some more topography in here, and I'll start making it up a little bit more, save on time. Fake it till you make it, enter. But what's really nice is the more complex and the more time that you spend tracing this, man, the better the drawing can be. But to be fair, this is something I've actually practiced over time. I used to use this in studio. Right, so I wasn't very good at modeling because, if you've heard my story, I had to learn Rhino in 2 weeks while I was at Texas Tech. and had a professor breathing down my neck making fun of me the whole time. So I ended up coming up with some better things because I was really good at modeling. I can model really fast, and that's something we did at San Antonio College very well. We didn't have a laser cutter, so we definitely knew our skills when it came to making something. So very often I would make it real quick, take a picture of it really nicely, and then trace it in Rhino because I didn't know how to model anything, right? So eventually you get really good at modeling, and you don't really need to even do this trace thing. But I do think it's a really good tool, especially if you're still kind of on the fence about some of this digital stuff, or wanting it to be too digital. You have a really good free hand, so you don't want to lose that. So I mean, it's a little bit more rare in that case, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. It's just another tool for the tool belt. But yeah, the more topography we get back there, the better. So I'm gonna spend a little bit of time getting it. Obviously I'm just faking it. My photo's a little too blurry anyway. Shouldn't have zoomed in so much. And one more, just to get kind of that horizon going on. Usually our horizon is horizontal, that's where the name comes from. And it's of course an apparent position of where the land meets the sky. That's looking pretty good. I do have some tree information in here, and let's face it, I'm not going to sit here and trace a damn tree, right? That would take forever, and don't get me wrong, it would look probably really nice, but I'm not going to do it, right? I have two options. I can bring those trees back in through Photoshop, or arguably even Illustrator, right? I might have to do some Photoshop work to them and bring them in quite literally, but I risk it kind of looking a little funny, right? Especially having Photoshop materials and lines and just all this stuff, right? It might sort of look a little mismatched. So in my case, I'd rather probably go to Pimp My Drawing. And get some trees, right? And I can definitely, just as much as I can put these in Illustrator, I can put them in Rhino too. In fact, they're a little bit easier to work with in Rhino. So let's take a look. This is also where I can get some people, cars, all kinds of stuff. But let's go get some trees. And maybe actually match the ones that he's already got going on, which is very similar to that. At least it's pretty close. So we'll go ahead and take that one and download it. Save. Sweet. But what is nice is, of course, we can put that in there. So we go to File, Import. You can also just drag and drop it in, but downloads and apricot tree. Who knew? Usually by default, I kind of just leave this as it is and just place it somewhere on the model. And as you can see, it's the world's most large tree. That's all right. We'll take the entire thing, and in my case, I might need to move my drawing over here real quick. Oh, but I locked it. That's okay. I'll just lock the rest of it. So I'll get my tree component and basically size it down using gumball. If you don't know what gumball is, it's usually at the bottom, and you do have to toggle it. You can turn it off as well. So I'm going to line up some things, fake it till I make it. I can tell this is kind of over there. Make it a little bit bigger. I might want to group it so that I don't have to do this every time. So I'm going to go ahead and group all of those lines together. Now it's not going to join them. I could do that as well, but not yet. So we'll take all these. Again, you can just move them. Get it pretty close. Seems pretty close. Go ahead and copy it and paste it. So we got a second one. I can flip it around. Not too shabby. We'll put that one towards the back. And I may need to actually trim away from it because obviously I have my building involved. I can get some things a little bit more square, right? Something like that. And that's looking pretty good so far. So I'm gonna go ahead and unlock stuff. and basically get the parts of the tree that I don't need. So I'm going to take this curve and that curve and basically trim. So TRIM, and get rid of anything that I don't need. In my case, as long as it's touching, I should be able to get rid of it. Oh, go back. Because it's only we only have to worry about the stuff that's touching, right? Otherwise, we can kind of just delete the rest. Stuff like that. Make sure you get it. And it looks like we're good over there. Looks like a couple of tree components in there. That's okay. We'll just delete them. Oh, gotta lock my photo back. Accidentally unlocked it. That's okay. And we'll take some of the leftover pieces we don't need and delete them. Obviously, we don't need a tree in the middle of our architecture, but now it's behind us, right? We've got some of the trees, we've got some of the components. I guess maybe the last thing I need is maybe a sidewalk. So let's get a sidewalk in there. I know he's got a very specific sidewalk in there, but faking it till I make it today. Right. Starts off probably pretty small in the back, sort of winds its way through. Again, just kind of faking it till I make it. Of course, you would use the lines that you have on your model, or of course use the lines that you've designed already. Of course, it's going to recede towards the back and get smaller and smaller and smaller, and eventually become very flat as it gets towards the horizon. Sweet. All right, we got a lot of stuff going. This tree is still kind of out there, so we might want to trim him out a little bit too. TRIM, trim. This is where it's a little bit easier. I can just really select anywhere outside of the box and make sure that I trim it off. All right, I can get really close to the box and make sure a lot of that stuff is trimmed. It looked like I got rid of too much, so let's go ahead and not do that and just get rid of the stuff we don't need. So like that, don't need it, don't need it. If it's not in the boundary, we don't need it. Because that's the stuff that would be outside of the page anyway. Oh no, we don't want to get rid of that. Just some of the tree information. Not that one. There's the one we need to trim. Probably just get all this. There we go. Sweet. Got some of the topography lines. You don't want little topography lines in there. I mean, if you're going for a sketchy look, maybe, but we don't want the sketchy look today. We can add the sketchiness back if we kind of even just want to use this as, I don't know why you would trace it here and trace it analog. You should probably only do one of those, right? If you're more comfortable tracing digital, do it, right? If you're more comfortable tracing analog, scan it in, right? Not a big deal. But that's looking pretty good, right? At least in terms of what we can do with it. So I'm going to trim, and maybe before we get into the Illustrator side, this is obviously an exterior perspective. Check. Interior perspective. Oh no, what do we do? So we might have to model something, right? And to be fair, what's nice is, well, if this is your first time, you don't have to model the whole thing. I'm gonna kind of just model, it is Louis, right? Yeah. I'm gonna kind of model from memory what we talked about on Monday and just kind of set up a quick little perspective, right? So based on what I know about his project, and again, it's a perspective, so I mean, don't get me wrong, I ideally would probably want to build this to the actual scale that it is, right? That way you guys could actually see like, oh yeah, I set it up for 20 feet ceilings, and the thickness of my building is only 10 feet, which actually gives this like really interesting feeling. Some of you guys are probably very particular about how small this space is or how big this space is, or does it open, does it do this, does it go over, is it larger boxes, is it smaller boxes? So it might be in your best interest to actually model it, right? You know, I kind of see Leah's there too. I could just probably make 3 boxes, right, and call it a day. then wire cut from those boxes any sort of doors or holes that I needed. But let's talk about it before we get to Illustrator. Yes, sir.
I have a question. For your windows, I saw that you copied and pasted it
Mhm.
on the same line. How did you do that?
I just copied it. I'll do another one. So I just took the piece, copy, enter, and I hold shift to keep it straight. And we'll put 4 windows today. Now technically that's not correct. They should actually recede a little bit, right? So if I wanted to be super accurate, I mean, I'm not going to do that for today's tutorial, but realistically I'd want to stay to the perspective, right? Which is pretty close for the camera. I mean, arguably we're pretty damn close. Anyway, but just kind of pointing that out, especially if you have something that's very dramatic, you won't need the same big windows. In fact, it'll be very strange optical illusion in which the windows are actually getting large, you know, in real life. Anyway, not to over explain it. But yeah, you can put scale figures in here, cars to the background, and arguably we can even get the sky involved with Photoshop, right? Or even Illustrator too. Anyway, getting to Illustrator. But let's go over an easy 1-point perspective. I mean, you guys should all kind of know this one. Like, you should dream about this one. I definitely dream about this one. And often, I'll even just sort of draw this one because it's so easy and I just think of a little space for myself. Anyway, so let's get a bounding box. As we know, our lovely 11 by 17s. And I just want to show you one that you can kind of draw in freehand. And it's the one that we all know and love. It's a small rectangle or box, right, towards the back. It's selecting a point for your vanishing point, right? Let's say it's a very tall room, and I'm very close. My head level's way at the bottom, right? Escamia's freehand 1 class should come into picture, right? You guys all sat in the hallway, or if you're in mine or Nick Rison's, you sat in the hallway. You had to pick the dot on the other side, and that was your dot. Am I ringing any bells here? Right. So there's that same dot. I'm going to use my lines. And this is where it gets really easy, right? I can use point. So I'll enact point right there. It'll lock on for us. And bam, I can use that and extend, right? So let's make it to that box, to that edge of the box, and box. And you're like, oh man, I get it, but how do we get it to the outside of the box? We'll extend it, extend, and basically just click on each line. Oh, went the wrong way, but that's okay. We'll trim it. And then we can take this piece, trim it, and get the other ones. You have the classic space, right, that you could start to draw on, right, quite literally. And I shouldn't have even deleted that because I can still use it. Let's take my line. Let's maybe get the edge of a window situation. And let's say the windows are this tall. Sweet. I'm gonna go with a line. And I can kind of fake it till I make it, right? I mean, hold shift to make some vertical lines, copy them, and trim. Right, there's my window. If you can kind of see it, trim. If you don't, I'm sorry. Maybe you shouldn't be in architecture. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, there's the window. Right? And like I was mentioning to Lewis before, like I can kind of fake it in a model picture, but if I copy this, right, it's not gonna look exactly right. Technically, it's a weird optical illusion now going on here. But I could just continue with what I was doing, right? So I could keep those. And if I needed multiple windows, I could, right? Just take that same thing and a little bit bigger. So I can take all of those, trim them, and get rid of what I don't need. And it takes some practice to see it, right? And that's why we practice a lot. Arguably too much. But yeah, now we got some windows in the room. And as you can see, what's nice is I didn't have to model anything, right? I could use this, I could print it out, get started, and even make it my own, right? That way it's all nice and accurate. And all I did was choose kind of the base of my project, right? Maybe saying that the room is 20 feet by 12 feet high. And that's that rectangle in the back. right? Now, what if I have a more complex project like Luis? Well, let's just model it real quick. You know, so for instance, I remember his being kind of like a box or like a rectangle area, and then it had this area kind of curved. I'm gonna go ahead and just offset it so that it's a nice congruent room. So offset. Let's choose our distance. So I'm gonna go from like here to there. That looks pretty good. Might have to move my box around. Might have to make it a little bigger. That's okay. I think it was something like that. I don't know, I'm going off of memory, Lewis. Something like that, and then copy. And then it was something like a termination that was a little bit bigger. I liked it. I'm sure it's changed by now, but yeah, something like that. Then I'll take this and trim it. And basically get started. So first thing I'd want to do is extrude some stuff. So I'm going to get into my perspective view, and of course I'm kind of making it up for Luis, but let's go ahead and extrude it. Well, let's even get fancier with this spice. Let's add some wall thickness to it. I mean, why not? Usually it's about 6 inches. I'm not to any scale, so I'm just going to make it up. I got some walls there. I got a wall there. Wall there, and a wall there. Pretty sweet. As you can imagine, I sort of made the floor plan, right, for the most part. From there, extrude it. Right, so we'll say it's about that tall. We'll say that one's about a little bit taller, I think I remember. There's something more like that. And then these two guys, we'll extrude them as well. So as you can see, a very base, right? I mean, let's face it, we're not modeling the whole thing, and I could even get more fancy with the spice and start adding holes and all kinds of stuff, right? I could start capping some things. That way it's sort of a closed space, but what have not, right? The next thing I need to do is get inside here and make a camera, right? So that I can get that view that I need, right? Similar to the interior perspective that we have. Now in his case, it might not be very thrilling to kind of see that, right? I might have to kind of work some things around a little bit if I zoom out a little bit, but you'll see that I can't do much, right? I'm a little limited, right? So the next thing I could do is make a camera. So I'm going to type in camera, and technically the camera is already there. So in my case, I just need to show it. Oh my gosh, there's no camera. Well, it's always by default going to make the camera of the perspective that you're at. So you'll notice when I zoom in and zoom out, my camera gets bigger, smaller. Why is that? Well, if I'm zoomed out, I have more things I can see, right? I'm basically messing with that cone of vision. Now, eventually I'll go into much more detail in computer graphics, but for today, you just need to set it in a good spot, right? You don't even need to know how to save it, but we do want to take that view and make 2D, right? To save ourselves some time. So the first thing I'll do is get really close to what I need. So in my case, you know, maybe I want a large view of that hallway going down, like we talked about. His particularly is about that kind of mystery going around the corner, so he might really want to show that to his client. So I'm going to get this pretty close, right? Fair enough. Yeah, it's looking pretty sweet. Yeah, it's very basic. But then I'll take my camera and I'll change some of the attributes to it. Ooh, very dramatic. That's a little bit more like how I drew it, right, Lewis? It was much more dramatic when I drew it on the board. So that's looking pretty good. Maybe I need to make sure my guy's height is appropriate. Maybe he's too short. Maybe he's too tall. Like, very often we put people way too tall in our perspectives. I like to treat them more like they're sitting on the ground. That's kind of the best shot. And you may have ever seen a photographer when they're taking pictures of architecture, they get like way to the ground. Right? That way there's this more dramatic appeal to the perspective. But we also don't want majority of the ground being looked at. So, oh, and you can't go back, right? There's no commands for the camera, right? So I accidentally zoomed out real quick, and that's okay. I'm glad we got that recorded. But we can take our point and we can really dial them in. Hopefully you guys kind of see what's going on there. I just taken the camera and moving it around, right? Keep in mind I can move it around this way too, so be very careful, right? But once we dial it in, maybe we got the right drama. That's too much drama, obviously. That's too little drama, right? So we want just the right amount of drama here. Yeah, it's getting there. Let's try again. Oh, it's very particular. If we get a little closer, there we go. It's locking in, but I think it's because I'm using these guys. There we go. Fair enough. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. So instead of zooming in on here, because I know it's fickle, I'm just going to zoom in with here. Ooh, there. Now we're talking. Right. Just moving that ever so slightly, and that's looking pretty sweet. So now I'm going to take the whole thing, at least everything that I modeled here, right? Looking pretty sweet. I'm going to just select the viewport and type in make 2D. I'm going to maintain my source layers. If I, really kept track of that. Hidden lines, I might want them. In this case, you probably don't, because there's a lot of stuff in there, right? It's going to get all of these lines involved. It's going to get the back side of the wall. I mean, we don't really need that information. We're not talking about a little object in computer graphics. So in our case, we just want some basic lines. So I'm going to take hidden lines off and press apply. Once it does that, it's going to produce those lines for us. And as you can see, well, it definitely got those, right? But it didn't get everything else. So I don't want to dial that in and find it again. So I will go over this just because it's so easy. You'll right click on the viewport itself and go to set camera. And it's our views panel. Oh, sorry, set view and named views. Yeah. So I actually already have it open. Well, let's toggle it again because I lost it. There it is. Named views. And there it is back again. So you can right click in named views and create new. That's not what I want. What the heck is this? Let's make it a little bit bigger so we can see it. Basically just looking for a little camera over here. Oh, there it is. Gotcha. Those are environments. We want the view. Apparently this stuff is just way too small for me to see. So let's get a little bit bigger. View current viewports. Nope. I've gone over this before, but it does seem to have changed in Rhino 8. That's okay. We don't necessarily need it, but in my case, if I wanted to fix that real quick, all I would need to do is wire cut that out so I don't see it, or just delete it from my view, right? If it's getting in the way of the view, just take it out. So let's try again. I'll select everything and click on the viewport and make 2D. No hidden lines again, apply. There we go, much better. Definitely a nice baseline. And let's get some of this stuff out of the way. Turn off my camera so it gets out of the way. Hide my camera, sweet. And let's move some of that stuff. Because now we can go to Illustrator. Make that a little bit smaller. And get that set up pretty nicely. Not too shabby. We'll take that, trim it. And now, relatively speaking, I didn't have to build a model. I didn't have to model anything in the computer. And now I have a nice little interior perspective that I can either draw on and print out or take into Illustrator, like we're gonna do today. It looks like stuff is grouped, so I'm gonna go ahead and ungroup it. Sweet. That way we can get rid of some of the stuff we don't need. Sweet. So we have plenty of stuff to take into Illustrator today. Let's go ahead and do so. So I'm going to take everything, File, export selected. And just like before, you'll use an AI file or a DWG. Right? Both of those will work and acceptable in Illustrator. So we'll take that. And we'll just make a test file for today, call it Illustrator Perspectives. Put it on the desktop, sweet. Export, not too shabby. Go ahead and minimize that, and we'll go ahead and open up Illustrator. We can open up that file directly, right? So we'll go ahead and press open. We'll go to the desktop and our Illustrator perspective. Sweet. Now once I zoom out, we'll see that there's quite a bit there, and thankfully they were on my C-plane. So we need to work out some things. I could do all three at the same time. Really could. All right, so that would be something that would save me also a lot of time, right? If I'm doing 5 perspectives, do I want to do 5 different files or just do it all on one, right? I don't know, you probably don't have a problem with 5 perspectives right now, but just getting 1 or 2 could make the difference of somebody getting your project or understanding the communication of what you want. So, file, document setup, edit artboard, and we'll make a couple of those. Of course, we want them to be 11 by 17, so I'm going to exit real quick, Command R for my ruler, just like Photoshop. Switch it to inches. And it's a pretty big space right now, so I do want to go back to Essentials Classic, Suite, File, Document Setup, Edit Artboards. That is currently 26 by, so we'll go with 17 by 11, and we'll add a couple. I can always line them up afterwards. We'll take that one. You can kind of see it tells you. 17 by 11, sweet, and one more, close enough, 17 by 11. Now that they're all the right size, now I'll get them lined up, because I'm OCD like that, and we can click outside of the box. But now we just need to line those up. So a good thing I have a bounding box. You just take that piece, line up one of my boundaries, zoom in a little bit. Oh, make sure I select everything and get that situated. Looking pretty good. Not too shabby. Use my arrow keys to further refine it as well. Nice. Not too shabby. Let's get the second one. Size it up a little bit. Really, I could size these all at the same time because technically they should be the same size. But we'll do it one at a time for today. Make sure you click on the line when you're trying to move something, otherwise it won't move. Get that as close as possible. Fair enough. And let's get that one as close as possible. And fair enough. Now, to be honest, Illustrator can draw stuff, right? And it's a wonderful vector program that many graphic designers use. However, it doesn't do the things like AutoCAD or Rhino, like trim or extend and things like that. It has different names like knifing tools and things that we'll start to get into a little bit more as we go, right? But even just a basic document setup, I think can go a long way for a lot of us, right? Because now you have straight lines that you can print out and make your own, right? But the next thing that we can do with them is, of course, change their line weights, right? So we can do that very easily. Take all of the lines at once, double click on the line color or stroke color, and change them, right? You can select each layer at a time, right? And make it a nice grayscale. We can even change the amount of weight, and so on. Again, we'll click on this little box and change the color. Definitely want a different line weight for that one. 0.55. It's looking pretty good. Topography lines definitely don't actually want green topography. We'll make them nice and light because they're not the most important part of this. And we'll make them pretty small. So 0.66. Already we're starting to get there. Let's get those blue lines, sweet. And as you can see, I have a lot of things in there. I can hold shift to deselect something. However, in Illustrator, you won't see it, right? Which is another reason why I don't like to draw in Illustrator. Let's go ahead and change those. It's a nice black. Let's go with like 0.55. Sweet. Let's get those. Those are those hatches that we did. And let's make those pretty dark. Nice, but not perfect black, right? Because that would be too black. In fact, even a lighter gray like that. Ooh, that's what I'm talking about. Oh, almost forgot the sidewalk. Maybe we make them stand out a little bit more by making it a little darker, but also very light. So I don't know, 0.35. Nice. Some good line weights in there. A couple of things I could do is add a sky. Right? So just like Photoshop, arguably I think it's easier in Photoshop, but we're going to be kind of adding Illustrator to our mix, if you will. But yeah, line weight wise, I might stop it at that for today, just because we're already at 11:10. But hopefully this is enough to get started in those perspectives, right? Whether it be, you just don't know how to model something yet, so that you can get some of those rooms in kind of realistic places. Some of you guys are still in sort of the study model phase, right? So it makes a lot of sense to not model it actually, just get some basic lines. That way you can still shape the windows, you can still shape some of the items within your project, right? Otherwise, fair enough for an introduction at least to Illustrator. In most cases, it should be a nice refresher, right? Oh yeah, artboards, where are those located? Oh yeah, line weights and those things. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's pretty intuitive. Like, say you have Photoshop open. So let's open up Photoshop. Another aspect that I like about Illustrator and Photoshop being a part of the same company is you can quite literally drag that in. It's already a smart object. Right, so check this out. I'm gonna do a new file and we'll do 11 by 17, 300, sweet. Don't really need it in portrait, so edit, image size, other way around. Sweet. But what's nice is, as long as you kind of have two open, now mine might be kind of hard to do that because I'm on a laptop. But I can take all these lines. Now what's important here is I'd want to change the line weights first, because once I put it into Photoshop, can't change it, right? I don't know what it is. Maybe we'll get some updates in the future that can do that. But at that point, you might as well put Illustrator and Photoshop together, right? I mean, eventually I think it will become that day. But you'll take all the lines you want and quite literally drag it in, and it'll be right there. Dragged in just like any other photo. And then I'll need to hold shift still, just like any other piece that I bring into Photoshop. Now I can press enter. And what's nice is now I can use my favorite tools, such as the magic wand tool, right? I can really get in there, change some things. Maybe I want to get the brush involved. Ooh, maybe it's a very interesting day. I can change some of the colors that maybe are already established. Stuff like that. Let's maybe make all those pink. Maybe why not? Oh, I'm on the wrong piece. There we go. Maybe not. Oh, there it is. There it goes. Let's change it to that color. That looks pretty sweet. Cool. Oh, my bad. Got the wrong thing selected. Magic wand tool. Choose a different layer, brush it in. All right. But as you can see, a very useful tool. I don't have to stick with one program just to do what it does. In fact, you may have noticed I use Rhino, Illustrator, and Photoshop all to get those things established. Using the best bits of each program. Rhino draws really well, exports things really well. Sweet. Illustrator makes really nice line weights, and I can do it really fast. Sweet. How do I add color really quick? Photoshop, right? So, yes, question? Paint, yeah. All right, you can paint it up, or you can add backgrounds or other textures, things that are a little bit more realistic. But what starts to be nice is that nobody can pin down exactly what you did. And that's what's actually kind of brilliant. They start to look at the artwork for what it is, and not, because don't get me wrong, most architects are pretty technical. They're like, how did you do that? How did you do that, right? And very often, those that are truly inspired by your artwork will then ask, how did you do that, right? But you never want that to be the initial point. You don't want them to get distracted by the offness of it, right? For instance, these trees are way too dark. I bet Amy can see them all the way from over there, right? When actually it was the buildings that were most important. And very often, especially in a studio project, we worry about the way the trees look, we worry about the ground, we worry about all this stuff, and we forget about the main point of the architecture, that you're trying to express some emotions and get those emotions conveyed across, right? So anyway, hopefully this tutorial is helpful in some way, or at least giving some ideas to what you could do to kind of salvage some of the studio stuff that's happening. But questions about Rhino, Illustrator, or Photoshop so far? Fair enough? All right, we'll leave it at that then. And of course, I'll get that uploaded by the end of today.